Hello and welcome to Intro to Polygon Modeling. At this point, we're almost ready to start doing our shading. The first thing we have to do is lay out UVs. Now, UVs are another component. When we look at our objects in Maya, we have our object at the object level, right-click, edges, F10 for edge, F9 for vertex, F11 for face, and F12 for UV again. And if I marquee select, there we go, or if I click select, I get the UVs on the object. Notice that they're green when selected, and if I right click to bring up the marking menu, there's UV. So you can see that the UVs are in the exact same location on an object that a vertex is. So vertices and UVs take up the exact same physical space. What the UVs do is they serve as a two-dimensional map for the 3D object. Just like a pattern for clothing, if you take a pattern for a shirt and lay it out on some fabric, cut out that fabric, you can sew it, get together a nice three-dimensional shirt which fits over a body. That's what UVs do. We need to do UVs to really apply color from any external engine. So if I want to Photoshop paint, maybe a little kid was scribbling with crayons on the walls. If I want that crayon scribble to show up, I need good UVs. So we're going to start with the walls. I select my walls, object mode F8, and I'm going to open up the UV texture editor. Windows, modeling editors, UV editor. Now you can see to start off, this mass of lines looks nothing like my room, and yet this is supposed to be a 2D map of this 3D object. So we need to make it look like this object. We're going to create a new UV map for it. So in the UV editor, we go create, and in this case we're going to use automatic mapping because that tends to work great for things like the walls of a room. So options box, I'm just going to reset it so that I'm back at defaults. And the two settings that I look at are less distortion or fewer pieces. If I'm doing a complex object, oh boy, I really want fewer pieces. For something like this, less distortion doesn't really matter because it's going to look at this object in 6 directions. So it's going to shoot straight down, straight up, from the sides and front and back in order to figure out where the object is and how to map the UVs accordingly. So 6 planes, that's the default. I don't ever change that. I'm going to leave it on less distortion, and I always want to make sure it's uniform so it doesn't stretch. I hit apply, and I look at my UV texture editor, and what it has done is cut these two rooms apart into these lovely little shapes. If I right click in here and say UV shell, and let's see, I want my interior walls, so I'll figure out where's this one. Okay, this is going to be my starting place, so W to move this wall around, and there we are. I want to be able to have my UVs seamless around these corners of the walls. So that way if a little kid did run a magic marker from one wall to the next, we could do that seamlessly. It would be very hard to do it otherwise. So I'm going to start sewing this wall to this wall to this wall to the other wall. So edge mode F10, and I select those edges. You can see its corresponding edges on the wall are also selected, and I just say cut and sew, move and sew, and there they are. Grab the next one, click, shift click to toggle them into selection. There you can see it is lining up, move and sew, and I think there's one more, move and sew, and there's all 4 parts of my walls. Now notice if I start selecting this final edge, shift select, you can see that the other side of it starts to select. And so what's going to happen is it's going to twist if I try to connect those edges. So I just leave them like that. Yes, there'll be a seam on this one wall. So I would have to make sure that that's the one wall that the little kid is not drawing on. So if I really needed to worry about it, I could make this be the wall with a seam. In fact, I'll do that because that's going to be behind the door anyway, so probably never on camera. So I'll cut that one, cut it, and then I'll select these guys, move and sew it onto the other edge. So now my seam is right here, and I know that the little kid in the storyboard never goes to that wall to paint, so I'm fine. I want to do the same thing for this interior wall. So let's see, where do I actually want my seam to be? Again, I'll put my seam behind the door. So I'll start with sewing there, move and sew, go to the next one, G to repeat, there's that one, G to repeat, right click to select shell, move it over, what's that, there's that, there's that, what's this one? Oh, that's my external wall. Oh, didn't realize I'd actually sewn that too. That's cool. Since I've already gotten that far, I might as well finish the job. F10, oh, just the edge. Move and sew, cut sew, move and sew. There we go. That's going to give me some problems, so maybe I don't want it. There's my floor, that's fine. That's the top of this. Eventually when I put a roof on, it's going to be covered anyway. These are going to be the door frames or window frame. All fine. My exterior walls are so much bigger than this that I'm going to cut them. So I'll just cut it right there. Cut, sew, cut. And now when I click on it, UV shell, you can see these are two separate pieces now. And that's just going to lay out better. What do I mean? Well, I have my object, and I come down in the UV toolkit to where it says layout. If all of these are closed up, arrange and layout is at the bottom. Find that layout button at the bottom. I want to select the whole object. So go to object mode, layout, and that lays out all my UVs back in this 0 to 1 space. The 0 to 1 space matters because when you bring in a file from Photoshop or whatever your texturing software is, it goes in this square, and the next square over will just repeat it and then repeat it again. So you want to lay it out all into this one square where the color is. There's no point in going over here because it doesn't give you anything different than this square. So now we've got our walls nicely laid out into our 0 to 1 space, and I'm going to apply a shader. So I'm going to open up the Hypershade, Windows, Rendering Editor, Hypershade. This window is where our texturing happens. We have a browser, and in the browser we have all the materials that are in the scene. Right now we just have the default materials, Lambert 1, and if I right click on Lambert 1, select objects in initial shading group, you can see that every single object in the scene is selected because I haven't added any other materials yet. Everything is just this default gray Lambert. Lamberts are great, they render fast, they have no specularity, no reflection. So if you want a matte surface, they're great. And they do render really fast, faster than anything else because of the lack of reflection and specularity. But we want something that's going to have a little more interest to it. So for the walls, I am going to create a new material, and down here in this little bin, create, there's Maya, and then I'm going to select surface, and that's going to limit the amount of materials we have. If we look at Maya, go back to Maya for a moment, there's a lot of different things. We don't want that many choices, so we limit our choices to surface. And you can see there's a lot fewer you can see there's a lot fewer choices, and the one we want is standard surface. Now, most of the time, we want to do a Maya software to Arnold workflow. When we looked at our images, there's my Maya software. There's my Arnold render. There's a lot better qualities here. We've got the reflection, the gloss is working, the free ambient occlusion, some really great stuff. The bump map's a little more here, but we could probably turn that up in order and get it if we really wanted it. Like I said, the color, the blue sheen is just the lighting. It is not the render engines. So you can see the couch is the exact same. The vase is the same. The coffee table is the same. The floor is the same. The painting, which is a Toulouse-Lautrec painting, all the same things, all the same shaders. All I did was shift from the Maya render engine to get this one to the Arnold render engine to get this one. That cost me a lot of time though. So this rendered in a couple seconds, this rendered in about 4 minutes. I can't afford 4-minute tests. So I do all of my testing, all of my rough and ready figure it out in Maya software, and then I come back, make a few tweaks, like in the coat, and render it in Arnold. So what we're going to go over is a Maya software standard surface to Maya Arnold, or to an Arnold render engine render. So that's why we use the standard surface. The Maya software, the Maya standard surface is a clone of the Arnold standard surface, but it works with the Maya software engine, which the Arnold standard surface does not. It's pretty much the only difference. So I now use a Maya to Arnold workflow with always using the standard surfaces. So I'm going to have a lot of shaders in this scene, so I really need to name them. So I click on my standard surface, and I'm going to name it walls. Okay. And for the color, we never want to use pure white. I'm going to give it a little bit of a mild cream tone, full value. And you can see just a little bit of warmth in that sample. And that's what we want. Specular, I'll bring the weight down a lot. A little bit of roughness in the diffuse, a little bit of roughness in the specularity, maybe a fair bit of roughness in the specularity, and I'll call that good. I click on my wall, I right click on my shader. Now it's a little weird. If I right click over here anywhere on my walls shader, assign material to selection, it works great. To get the same thing, the same right click to work, it has to be done only on this little header of the node. So right there I can assign the material to selection. I think I still have my Arnold going. Oh, Maya software. Okay. So you can see the wall is now a slightly different color. And that'll brighten up or darken depending on the lights. I'm just going to give that a teeny bit more saturation. That's a bit much. We'll have to turn that down. That's god-awful beige right now. We'll see how it goes. Next thing is to add a bump map. If you look at the paint on the wall, there's just very fine bumps on it. So here we go. We come down to geometry. So this was a little interesting. It took me a while to figure out that here in the property editor, which is the attribute editor inside the Hypershade window, if you go down to the geometry drop-down menu, open it up, we have thin-walled and opacity, and there is no bump map, period. In the attribute editor, you have bump mapping. Now that I found where Autodesk hid bump mapping, attribute editor only, not property editor. Thanks, Maya. We're going to put a bump map onto our wall texture, our wall shader. So bump mapping, checker box in order to bring up our list of options. I want to use a fractal. 2D textures, fractal. And so now I have my bump node, my fractal, and our place 2D texture node. And the walls look absolutely crazy, like they're a cave or some horribly overdone stucco. Interesting parts are smooth here. So let's talk a moment about how a bump map works. A bump map is a grayscale image, and 0.5 gray, so 0 is fully dark, 1 is fully light, 0.5 gray right in between the two is no bump. 0.5 gray is 0 bump. When you go darker than 0.5 all the way down to 0, at 0 it's fully depressed, and at 1 it's fully lifted up. How much that 0 to 1 works is affected by the bump depth, or a declaration of the bump depth. So you can limit it to, this is a multiplier, so 0.1. You can see that shrunk my bump map. 0.01 of my bump depth shrinks it even more, and it's starting to look not quite so ridiculous. The fractal that I'm using is a black and white or grayscale image. I like it because it just gives a random pattern or texture that I can apply to the walls. Gives a nice sense of unevenness, and that right here is what it looks like. It's in its little surface thing by itself, and I control it with the bump depth. 0.01. Let's go even smaller. Let's try 0.001. I can still just see it. Let's try 0.003. Yeah, close up, it's really visible. That might be a bit much. Let's see how it renders. Yeah, I think that's all right. It's visible, you see it, but it's not drawing attention. It doesn't look like the deep cave, and it's kind of nice. Gives my ugly beige walls a nice little bit of texture. So that is the walls laid out with automatic mapping. We added a base color, this beige, and then a bump map using the attribute editor. That is our first object. See you in the next video for texturing the couch.